Hey, welcome back to this new video, and this is part 6 of our player dev helper system. So let's get right into it. So what we want to do now is that we want to go into the player dev helper underscore config. In here, we want to create the reward table and the required dev table. The way we do that is write local rewards, and I like to call it table when it's a table here, and set it equals to and the code brackets. And let's just create the next table. So local required devs table, and set it equals to code brackets, and then open it up here. Let's head back up to the rewards table. So since we want to give the player gold, or maybe just silver or something, for when they die a certain amount of times, like to help them, we will write the values here. So for gold and such, we need to go back to the Eluna documentation. In here, you can write modify money, and you see the player : modify money. So go in here, and the reason I'm showing you this is not because of the function or the method, it's because of this. So when you give money to a player, the value is in copper. So that means if we write 100 here, that's 1 silver. So we need to calculate that. So if we want to add, let's say, let's give the player like 100 gold, we would write 1. So that's 1 silver. That should be 1 gold. And if we want to give the player 100 gold, that would be this. So, oh, sorry. Oh no. No. This should be 100 gold, yeah. Yep, and now let's just say we want to keep going here. So we want to say 200. And let's say 300, and I think it's the 100 mark this, but I'm not that good at calculating this on the go. So if here we have the goal amount, now we want the rewards table. In here we want to write just the amount of times the player needs to die for each reward. So I will just go up by 2 deaths every time. So that would be 2, 4, 6, 8. So what this is now, when you see here, the way we will calculate everything when we check if a player should receive any rewards, it would check if 2, so has the player died exactly 2 times. When the player dies, then it gets the first reward. Has the player died exactly 4 times, then it gets 200, and so on. So that's almost everything. The only thing you need to do inside the config file now is return. So return and code brackets, and here, like we always do when we return something, we write rewards table and rewards table. So we write the names of the variables we want to expose to other scripts. And required devs table equals required devs table. And that's all for the config file. So let's close that down. And now let's see what we want to do now. What we can actually go ahead and do now is go ahead and create the reward system. So go into your player dev helper underscore reward system. In here, what we want to do is make a function, call it should player receive gold. I don't know if I spelled receive correct, but it doesn't really matter as long as I know what it says. So here, or not gold, should player receive reward. In here we would say the reward dev's table. So this would be the table inside of our config file here. So let's call it required devs. Here required devs table, comma, and keep it as a lowercase, the first word or the first character, comma, and now we want the reward table. So that would be the configs rewards table. And next we want the player table, or the player table. The player table is when, so let me just end this off, then I can explain better. So right in here, what the player table is like if we were sent in. So this value will basically be player list, and in here we would on or inside our core script we would send this to the player table. So we would send this because then we get the player with this ID and we get all the data about that player, and then we have it here, and we don't need to check if this is the right ID because we already know that is the player who triggered the event. So next we want to say local player, and then we say player table, and then here we get the player object, get our variable player object. So we get this because this sends the player from the event with it. Then we do a loop. So first you write for I equals 1, comma, for do, and end. So what we're doing here is just a looping over 1 to 4, and the reason we write 4 here is because our tables here is only set up to be for rewards. If you had like 6 here, you will write 6. Normally you would do this in another way, but then we would be required to make a custom function to get the count of how many rewards are in here. And I think that's a bit too much for right now and for this tutorial. But later on in other series I make, we will create functions like that. So here, so a loop, basically a loop is, it runs through. So if you think about a loop and you go in here, then let's say a loop basically just goes over a function a certain amount of times. So for us, it would go over it 4 times. So if I put in a print statement here, so if I have print, this is my loop, and then space and dot and what this would do, this would say, because this runs 4 times and I is the current count, so that would say this would print this would actually print to this window. It would say this is my loop 4 times, but it would say this is my loop 1, this is my loop 2, this is my loop 3, this is my loop 4, because of the I is the index of it. So let's go ahead and check. Over here we say if. What we are doing right now is that we're checking if the dev count is equals to anything inside the required devs table, and we also check if what we have from the player already, the hash rewards, is 0. Because it's 0, and let's say it's 2. So let's say we go over the first one here, and our death count is exactly 2. That means we want to give the player the reward, the first reward here, but we also need to make sure that the player already doesn't have that reward in the database. So that's the way we check this. So here we would write if, and then we say player table, that's the player. Then we say dot death count, or I think it's death counter, right? Yeah, death counter, or yeah, death counter. And then we say equals reward, or required required deaths table, and then we in here we set the I, because this is the count, so that's the index of where we are in this loop. So when we run this over this if statement the first time, then it runs over this and it checks this. Then after it does that and it reached the end, then it basically +1 to the I, and then it does it again and again and again until it hits 4 times. So let's say I. So what we're doing here is that we're checking if the death count is exactly equals to the required deaths table, and we write and player table dot has earned rewards table inside our player. We put that here, and then again we check compared to the index, because that's the first reward from the database check. And then we say then end. So it only goes in here and runs this code if the player's death count is exactly equals to the required death table using the index, and if the player hasn't already received this reward already. So that's in here. That means, okay, we should give the player a reward. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we can do here is that we would create a new function to give this player the goal. So give player reward, and in here we would give it the player, that would be the player object, and we want the reward amount. Or actually, what we can do here, this is like a pretty neat thing we can do. If we can get, we can say index. So the index here. So here we say we want to give the player the goal first. So modify money, as we saw on the documentation. And then we want to give it the, oh yeah, we need to give it still the table for the rewards. So rewards table. We would go into here, write rewards table, and then inside here we want to write index to get the index. So that would say, if let's say this index is 2, that means the player would get 200 gold. Now we just gave the player the gold. Next up, what we now need to do is we want to make a new function again, call it function update player reward check. In here we will again give the player table, because now we need the player table, and we want the reward received or we actually just want the index, we can just call it index this time, and then end. And here we can write player table. We go into the player we have, then dot, and then say has earned rewards. Now we want the ID of this reward, or the index, that is index. And now what you do here is we set it to 1. Because if you remember, I talked about a boolean. So like a light switch you turn on and off. What we can do is that, or the way you can think about 0 and 1 is that 1 is true, 0 is false. So when you're working with integers inside a database, the way you would normally do it is that if it's 0, then it's false. If it's 1 or higher, then it's true. But since we always only set it to 1, we know that it's always true then at 1 and not higher. So that would be fine for us. So now let's take this, and then we go up here, and then we actually just, we go up here, sorry, my bad, go up here, then we call this function, but we send the player table with it, and the index. And right before we do that, we give correct. Let's head inside WoW and check. Right before we head into WoW again, actually, I want to change something because I forgot about one thing. So just for safety, we want to actually go in and again go into the player list. And here, the GUID, so find the player in the list, and then say player object, and set it equals to the player from the event. The reason we are doing this is then we are sure that it has the reference to the object, the player object here. We are just making sure that it's always updated. So the player, or the player in the list has the correct player object always. Just making sure to update it, because sometimes this can actually be removed or changed so it doesn't have a pointer. So when, just to give you an example here, wrong thing. If we say that a player dies, then the object, or like in code, it's like a pointer. So if I point it to something, I will point to the player object. But that means when the player dies and you respawn, it can actually remove that pointer to that player object and set it with a new one. So that's why we do this. So we always sure that we have the correct player object stored in here when the player dies. So let's save this and let's head into the database, and let's see here. Let's change this to 0, or actually let's change this to 1 just for testing. And let's go back into WoW. Now let's reload Eluna. Let me just get the console back down here. It's here. Reload Eluna. Hit enter. Now let's head into the world. Let's see our money. We have 0. And let's see what our console says. It says player found this. And the dev counter is not 0, it's 1, but that's because we changed the print function, or the reprint the thing. So let's die to a monster here real quick. Let's just die to this one. And now we should actually, yep, I died, and let's respawn. And now you see we got 100 gold, and that 100 gold is because we set it in here. So this is 100 gold. So I think that will be all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and a subscribe. and leave a comment if you have any ideas or recommendations for anything you want to see. See you in the next one.